So, all right, tonight we are going to be in Hebrews chapter 5, and I'm going to have to call on new people tonight because most of my regulars are gone. The Pulliams are all gone. I can't pick on Nathan. I can pick on Larry though. So, but I got Tim. I saw Will. Where's Will? There's Will. So I got enough people I can call them out. Right, Andrew? There we go. All right, so let's go ahead and read chapter 5, and then we'll start talking about what's in there. Every high priest is selected from among men and is appointed to represent them in matters related to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He is able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and are going astray, since he himself is subject to weakness. This is why he has to offer sacrifices for his own sins as well as for the sins of the people. No one takes this honor upon himself. He must be called by God, just as Aaron was. So Christ also did not take it upon himself the glory of becoming a high priest. But God said to him, "You are my son, today I have become your father." And he says in another place, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with loud cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Although he was a son, he learned obedience from what he suffered. And once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him, and was designated by God to be the high priest in the order of Melchizedek. We have much to say about this, but it is hard to explain because you are slow to learn. In fact, though by this time you ought to be teaching others, you need someone to teach you the elementary truths of God's word all over again. You need milk, not solid food. Anyone who lives on milk, being still an infant, is not acquainted with the teaching about righteousness. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. So one of the things that really kind of caught my attention reading this, it's talking about the high priest and his role and his responsibility, and then at the end it talks about how we should be working out our own salvation, but it's also indicating that we need to be taking care of each other. My dad was an elder for 15 or 16 years. And I will tell you one thing. Anybody who desires the work of an elder, God bless you. Because seeing what my dad had to do, I don't ever envy it. One of the hardest things my dad ever had to do was have very difficult conversations. If he knew somebody was going astray, it's hard to have some of those conversations. And I will guarantee you, if you ask Kevin or Richard or Will, it's not fun. It's really not. But it is a requirement. It is something that we are all called to do, but unfortunately, a lot of the time, the ministers and the elders get it dropped on them. How is it we're supposed to go about making those corrections and having those conversations? And Kevin and Will, y'all can't talk for now. How do we do that? You know what? I knew I was forgetting somebody. Jim, I'm sorry. I include you in the same praise for serving in the role. How hard is it?
We do it with meekness and gentleness.
Meekness and gentleness.
Go directly to that person first. Don't gossip about it, and then try to go to that person.
Yep.
Just go to that person first.
How hard is that? I mean, I can tell you there are times, my boys are 20 and almost 24. They would not believe it, but there were times when I had to have conversations with them. But you can ask Melissa, I really didn't want to have them. I did not want to have some of those conversations. But it's part of my role as their father. But it is also part of our role as members of the church to be looking out for the flock. Yes, the elders have the office of being a bishop, but that doesn't relieve us of that responsibility. When James talked about approaching them in meekness and in kindness, what does that look like?
I think, it's not, if we're dealing with a situation where we're trying to help someone that we believe is in some kind of sin, habitual sin or error, we never need to go like we're enjoying it. It's something that, sin is something that hurts everyone. So I think part of that meekness is, you don't go with an attitude of, I'm perfect, I'm here to fix you. I think that's what.
I agree wholeheartedly with everything Tim said, 100%. What else? Sometimes when somebody's doing something, it's easy to see that they're doing something wrong. One of the aspects that we always have to remember is swearing a worse sin than anger? A sin is a sin. And one of the things we always have to remember as we approach somebody, and I am not at all diminishing what Tim said, but one of the things that we always must keep in mind as we do this is you better look in the mirror too, because you're just as guilty as that person of something. It may not be as obvious, it may not be something that people know about, but we all are sitting in the same seat as the person we're approaching. How did the process of the high priest work? How did they handle their duties, specifically when the sacrifices had to be offered?
Priest are different than the high priest.
Correct.
You're talking about
The high priest.
the high priest on the Day of Atonement is different from the day to day.
Yep. Let's go with the high priest, because that's where he's drawing the parallel between Christ as the high priest and the high priest.
Day of Atonement, the high priest did two or three things. One, he'd take a bath. He dressed in all white inside, garments inside and out. In other words, he took out all of his gaudy robes.
Yep.
He then bathed, cleaned himself. He took 2 goats or 2 lambs. He then he killed one blood of the lamb. He then laid the sins on the other goat and put him out. He then took the blood of the lamb. He asked for himself repentance of sin. He took the blood and he poured it on the mercy seat and at the foot of the mercy seat.
So was he just doing it for the people's sins?
Doing it for himself.
Absolutely. who's doing it for himself. And so part of what we're looking at here, Christ is the high priest of the church. And so a sacrifice had to be made. And so that sacrifice was Christ. There had to be a sacrifice to fulfill the process and the covenant. And Christ made that sacrifice. But one of the things that he asks of us, and one of the things that is talked about in chapter 5, is approaching and helping each other. Who has approached somebody and found the conversation really didn't go the way you thought it would? Even if you do it with the right mindset, you do it out of a sense of kindness, and you approach somebody gently, and it just turns sideways. What do you do? I guess I was out and on my own. My brother and I, for years, fought. My brother and I have always been relatively close, but we fought like cats and dogs. And I was doing something I shouldn't be doing. And my brother sat down, and my brother is a very direct, very dispassionate person. And he was explaining to me what I was doing wrong. Didn't work out so well. I threw dinner at him and got up and left. What do you do? On either side of it, in time, I was actually able to sit back and think about what he said to me. It took a little while. But I sat back and looked at it and thought about it, and I was like, okay, let's figure out what was going on here. And finally, we got back together, and I told him, I said, let's talk about what happened. And I expected that to go worse than the first conversation did. But I was shocked when I sat down and I looked at him and I said, you know what? I definitely overreacted. He looked at me and goes, you think? I mean, I literally took a plate of food and threw it at him at a restaurant. And, but he sat there and he said, okay, well, tell me where it is we went here. And so we went through it, and, he said, okay, so you got what I was asking, I was trying to point out. And so, I go through that to remind everybody, we've got to be accountable to each other. One of the easiest things to do is stay on a course if you're being held accountable. When last July, I guess it was, they made the determination I had to have my knee replaced. And so I went in to the surgeon, and my A1C was way too high. I think it was 9.1. And the surgeon looked at me and he said, if you don't have it down by the 1st of October, I will cancel this surgery. And I had to have it from a 9.1 to a 7.5 or lower. And it scared me because I was in a lot of pain. There were mornings when I would get up and Melissa would be going, what's wrong? And I'd just be either sitting on the side of the bed or standing there leaning on the bed because I couldn't put any weight on my knee. And I said, they're going to cancel the surgery. And, we decided I needed to get some help in managing this process. So one of the people I work with is diabetes management is her specialty in nursing. So I talked to her, and she said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Every day, I had to take my blood sugar twice a day, and every week I had to send her all my scores for the week. And she said, if your scores are out of alignment, we're going to talk. Now, I don't know that anybody here knows Michelle Talley, but she's about this tall. But she is one of the most driven people I know. She was born with a defect in one of her arms and was told all her life she couldn't do things. I don't know how somebody becomes a nurse not having both hands fully available to them. I don't know how nurses become nurses to begin with. I admire y'all too. But she was going to hold me accountable. I will tell you, from July through probably, I think what was it the first week in October when I had to have the test, I had to have my A1C drawn again. I was so focused because I knew somebody was holding me accountable. Somebody was watching me, and I knew that in her heart, if she had to have a conversation with me, it was to help me. She got nothing out of helping me, absolutely nothing. Now, nurses are nurses and they help, but she gained nothing out of helping me get ready for that. And there was twice where I had to give her a score that one of them was, I think, like 210 and one was like 190. And she sat there and she looked at me and she goes, okay, tell me about it. I don't want to. And she said, nope, you got to tell me about it. And so she held me accountable. She was very sincere in what she was doing. She was very open to listening to what I had to say. And after I explained it, I expected a lecture. After I explained to her what had happened, she said, okay, that's only 2 out of the last 2 months. She said, that's gonna happen. I was sitting there going, So at the end of the day, we get through and it's time, and I go to get my blood work done, and my A1C had gone from a 9.1 to a 5.7. And I will tell you, the only reason that worked is because I knew I was accountable. And one of the things that we need to be to each other is an accountability partner. There is nothing, at least for me, there is nothing that will keep me straighter than knowing somebody's watching. And it's not that they're watching for me to fail, they're watching to help. Has anybody ever had somebody who really was something like that for them? It's the cornerstone of a lot of recovery programs. You have an accountability partner. And one of the things that we need to be able to do for each other is hold each other accountable. It is critical, as Tim described and as James described. It needs to be done in meekness and in love. And you need to understand, when you approach somebody, it may or may not be positive right then and there. How many people have punished a child and felt good about it after you did it? I can say I did. Travis is back there pointing at me. It truly is hard to do that. But if we're sitting here looking at the charge that we have, as we read through here, especially as we get to, when we start in the early part of chapter 5, where we're talking about, every high priest is selected from among men, is appointed to represent them. These weren't special people. These were from among them. When Christ came to earth, he was as we are. He had all of the same temptations that we had. You know, let me see if I can find it real quick. During the days of, verse 7, during the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with loud cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Although he was a son, he learned obedience from what he suffered. And once made perfect, he became the eternal salvation for all who obeyed him and was designated to God to be the high priest in the order of Melchizedek. As you think about it, what are some of the things that come to mind as you think of Christ and the sufferings that he had? The obvious one is crucifixion. What else, though? What are some of the other things that Jesus suffered? Humiliation, absolutely. Loneliness. Explain that one a little bit more.
Well, he reassures us that, he says, know assuredly that if they hated me, that they will, for my sake, hate you also. So, I mean, it gives us I guess a little bit of comfort in knowing that he's got our back, and it's a good verse when you're talking to somebody who thinks that it's the way to go to run with the crowd, you know, be like everybody else. It gives you the option to make a stand and say, I'm not crossing this line, this is how I'm going to live my life, you know. Sometimes it can be lonely, but he's always going to be there with us.
Good. And the part of what Kevin said that is absolutely perfect, he said, if they hated me, they're gonna hate you. And that is 100% true. One of the hardest things that I think all of us will suffer is when someone very, very close to you betrays you or isn't there when you need them. What happened when Jesus went and prayed in the garden? The three disciples that he seemed to trust the most, I won't say they're any different, but he had a special relationship with the three of them. If they had been listening to what he had been teaching them, he was distraught. And he goes off to pray, and they go to sleep. And what does he say to him when he comes back? Could you not stay awake for just a few minutes? That is someone who is feeling somewhat betrayed or let down from how I would be feeling. Judas clearly betrayed Jesus. I think the one piece of that whole process that really always stands out to me is that point in time, and we talked about it a little bit last week, that point in time as Christ is hanging on the cross, when God removes himself from his presence. And he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? He had to take on the sins so that the sacrifice was complete. He had to do it. And we know that sin can't enter into the presence of God. And so he was, as Kevin described, all alone. There was nobody else that could fulfill the sacrifice that he was there to fulfill. And that's why they draw the comparison between the high priest and Christ. The high priest was the only person who could offer that sacrifice. He was the only person that could enter into the Holy of Holies to perform that ceremony on behalf of himself and the people. The biggest difference between the two is the high priest in the Old Testament was offering a sacrifice for his sins as well. Christ was not. He was taking on all of our sin as he went through this whole process. So, in drawing it back, what are some of the things that stop us from holding each other accountable?
Clearly, the fear of confrontation is one.
Fear of confrontation.
I'd say another one is sometimes, talking about this within the context of our church family, we haven't necessarily done the legwork prior to, we get into a situation where we need to confront someone. This works the way that it should. We ought to have a basis of a relationship of love with one another where, hey, this is a difficult message, but what's wrapped up in the relationship we have. So sometimes, it falls to us that maybe we haven't created a relationship with you.
I'm gonna pick on Drew a little bit because he's not here to defend himself. Over the course of the last 2.5 years, I know y'all have been down here with me for what, almost 2 years now? So I guess probably about 2.5, maybe a little bit more than that. There have been times when I got really, really frustrated. And who do you always take your frustration out on? It's either the elders or the minister. And so I would say things to Drew, and he would very calmly and quietly listen, and he would reflect on it for a minute. And there was one time, and I said something, I don't remember the full context, but I didn't say it in a really nice way. And so we sat there for a minute. We were at Cracker Barrel, and he sat there and very quietly he took a couple bites. He looked up at me. He said, "Now, do you want to try and rephrase some of that?" And I sat there and I was like, you know what? That took a lot, because he could have shut it down and just moved on. I'm sure he hears more problems than I will ever hear from people. But he takes his role, and I don't think, I haven't known Drew that long, but I believe that even if Drew wasn't a minister, that would still be something Drew would do. He will sit there and he will listen. And he could have just shut it down and said, "I don't really know this guy. He's a pain in the butt." And just kind of moved along. But he didn't. And so when we do things like that, when we do it in the right way and we keep our hearts open, we draw that relationship and we create that level of accountability to where, part of it comes down to, I don't want to do things like that because I don't want to let Drew down. I didn't eat things I shouldn't eat because I didn't want to face Michelle. But having that level of accountability with each other and making sure that we're there for each other and making sure that we have resources to go to that are people that have a like mind, a like heart, and we're trying to help each other to our ultimate destination is absolutely priceless and something that we are all called to do. Some people are going to be able to talk to people and some aren't. It's hard. But when the circumstance presents itself, try and step across that ledge, step out of your comfort zone, and make yourself vulnerable to hear, and make yourself open enough to see the person you're talking to is hurting. And they want some help. Most of the time when people are doing something they shouldn't, they know they shouldn't be doing it. And nobody has held them accountable. I would bet you if you ask the elders, most of the time when people sit down and reflect and listen to the guidance that they're given, it does cause a change. It may not bring them all the way back, but it does stop and people understand and they think. And we need to be that for each other. We need to be that support for each other. I don't think it's a coincidence that that is also why we're told not to forsake the assembling of the saints. It's hard to build a relationship with somebody you only see Sunday morning. But if you see somebody Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and you go to activities that are organized, I will tell you, I am not one to jump into places and people that I don't know all that well. And I did something for the 4th of July party I don't usually do. You could ask Melissa. Rhonda and Calvert kept encouraging me to come to the party. I had an excuse that day to not come because there was an emergency down at work, but I sat there, and as I was driving home from work, I remembered, and I felt wanted to be there, to be a part of it because of Rhonda and Calvert. And I will tell you, we talked about it earlier on, there are very few times that I've actually not felt like getting up and coming to church that I came and I regretted it. I can tell you, I did not regret at all stopping here that night and spending, about an hour, hour and a half with folks. I was late, but when I got here, everybody greeted me, everybody came up and talked. Now, I think they really just wanted to find out how Melissa was, but that's okay. It's something that we're there for each other, and it's an important aspect of who we are and what we are. I know the first bell rang, didn't it? Okay. So we're just about, any other comments, questions, statements? All right, you get a couple of minutes extra. Till next week, we'll jump into chapter 6.